Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. Before we get into the podcast, I'd like to give a big shout out and thanks to Zoho, and particularly the team at Zoho Desk for sponsoring the podcast this month. Zoho Desk is trusted by over 50,000 businesses around the world to elevate their customer service. And the team over there recently asked me to write a white paper for them that explores how focusing on employee happiness and customer success can drive business results. The white paper is called The Killer Combination: Customer Success, Happiness, and the Right Technology. Now do check it out by following the links in the show notes, because I think you're really going to like it. So, shall we get into the interview? So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Prashanth Krishnaswamy, who is the head of market strategy and thought leadership for Zoho CX. Now, I've never had anybody on the podcast from Zoho before. So I'm really interested in talking to Prashanth and finding out a bit more about what they're up to and all these different things. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking. Prashanth, how you doing? And welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Adrian, for inviting me to the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here, even more additionally so being the first person from Zoho to be on the podcast. Absolutely.
Now, so Sean, for the benefit of those folks that don't know you or don't know Zoho, can you give us the sort of the thumbnail, quick intro on the background to kind of yourself and Zoho, and so some of the stuff that you get up to and what you do?
Sure, perfect. So my name is Prashanth, but people mostly call me PVK. I lead the market strategy and thought leadership efforts for the customer experience product group at Zoho, which includes our products across sales, marketing, service, commerce, AI, BI, and so on. If you haven't heard of Zoho itself, it's the world's broadest suite of business software applications across marketing, sales, service, finance, HR, and more. And our software actually powers the productivity of over 80 million users from over 150 countries around the world. And to tell you about myself personally a little bit, through my career, I've owned outcomes across marketing, business development, and product management. And I'm personally passionate about technology, design, and customer experience, among other things, of course. And I've been fortunate to serve at the intersection of all three of those things, and then benefit immensely from being in that vantage point.
Excellent. Now, I think it's a funny thing about Zoho, because you're absolutely right. You're all over the place, 150 different countries, all these different kind of operations, and you've got this massive, broad sort of like suite, which it literally is. I mean, you talk about it, I think, as being like an operating system for business, and it sort of is. And it's kind of cool. It just kind of goes, oh, there's another thing, and there's another thing, and another thing, and it's just like you're building your own kind of ecosystem. But in setting up this podcast, I'm really interested in this sort of whole experience domain. And you were talking to me about Zoho's vision for CX. So can you tell me a little bit more about kind of that? Because I think that's kind of interesting and different.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So Zoho's vision for our customer experience platform and mostly all of our customer experience endeavors broadly is to simplify the experience economy. That's pretty much what it is. And what we're actually doing at a day-to-day level to make that happen is to build a system of experiences, which includes technology, which includes know-how, content, and so on and so forth, that essentially accomplishes four broad things.
Mm-hmm.
First is that it transforms every touch point for a brand into an experience center where the customers are able to move their journeys forward at every step. The second is it empowers every stakeholder in the customer journey to do the best that they can for the customer through the use of data, context, knowledge, and actions.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also brings the company together through cross-functional collaboration, unlike anything that we've seen before. And finally, listening to all this, it may seem like a lot of this is complex, and that is the fourth one, which is that the platform aims to reduce the complexity involved in achieving and scaling all of these things.
Right. So what I find interesting about that, and good as it were, is that it sort of starts with, and that's something I've been banging on about for some time, is it starts with the kind of the vision, right? The end point. It doesn't start with, oh, this is what we can do with the technology. It starts with, this is the kind of almost the outcome. And so you talk about making it sort of connected and that people can be self-powered or self-serve, or they can kind of like determine and so on. But in the back end, people can collaborate and work together in service of that as well. And I think that's the thing and also that I'm really interested in words and their intention. And you talk about being in service to something, or being privileged to have served at the intersection of something. And I think that's something I think about when I think about some of the things you talk about, some of the things that Zoho talks about, particularly around their customer experience and their vision. But also I'm intrigued by this idea about companies thinking about doing things kind of like more and the impact of them. Because in the Punk XL book, we've started to explore this idea that it's no longer sufficient to talk about just customer experience in isolation. You have to talk about the whole thing, the experience domain and its multidimensional sort of nature. And you have to do that in a systemic, integrated, holistic sort of fashion. And I know that's something that is dear to the hearts of everybody at Zoho, and how that kind of starts to manifest itself. And one of the things I think that I found out about recently, which I wanted to ask you about, because it kind of brings that to life, is this thing called like transnational localism. And I was like, what? It's like something out of the World Bank or the IMF or something. I'm like, and what is that? And like, so what is it? What does it mean? And how does it work?
Okay. So transnational localism is essentially how we go to market at Zoho, right?
Right.
How we take all these products to market. And the at its most fundamental level, it's extremely practical, and it's born out of rationality and from our years of experience of building products and building this large company. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think of it as a framework to sort of build and scale sustainable growth by prioritizing what we believe is locally relevant context. All of that might sound like a little bit more complex, so I thought I'll break it down into a few things that we've consciously chosen to do, so that you're able to understand how it manifests itself in the day-to-day of how we work at Zoho. Right? First is, of course, you would have heard of this quite a bit, which is doing what's right for the customer. But beyond just saying that, or beyond just putting up a sticker on the walls of the office or things like that, what that turns out to be is sometimes it can mean that there's a lot of additional work for us as a vendor if we have to do something that's right for the customer. Right? And sometimes it may mean that that we may have to change our own priorities in the near term or in the midterm. Right? And sometimes it may even mean honestly turning down a deal because we may believe the customer does not need this solution.
Mm-hmm.
whatever it essentially means, we believe that it's worth our best effort, right? So that's the first thing, doing what's right for the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Second is what we've been following for many years, but more prudently during the pandemic itself, which is scrutinizing input costs. And I think it's relevant in today's world because a lot of companies are essentially building for growth at all costs.
Yeah.
But as a company, we've always had a keen eye on all our input costs, and we don't mindlessly compete on Google ads or Bing ads or things like that, for example. And we've built our own cloud infrastructure. We don't rely much on other cloud infrastructure vendors, so we're not subject to their own input costs. Then our regional expansion as a company also is focused on small towns, and it stays away from the big cities. Largely stays away from the big cities. Right? And we've also sort of famously never asked for a college degree in our hiring efforts for almost 25 years now. And if you notice, there's a common pattern across all of these, which is that we are reducing input costs for us. But even when talking about not requiring a college degree, we are essentially reducing the input costs to even the people who are going to join us as employees. Right? All these are really well thought out, rational decisions for us for the long term, and that sort of brings me to the next idea, which is about avoiding irrational fancy decisions. So we usually avoid latching onto trends without analyzing them for the long term and their viability and things like that. And then we don't have, for example, fancy titles within the company itself. And almost all of our content marketing that you see out already is aimed at driving value rather than creating immediate engagement or virality or things like that, for the sake of it, right? And our office spaces are also extremely functional, and in fact, most of our offices feature artwork from our own employees.
Okay.
So we don't even, as a company, we don't even try to be cool. We would rather be reliable and rooted than try to be cool. And so that's number 3, right? And then the fourth is about nurturing local communities, particularly to do with talent pools and ecosystems. And we believe that this is extremely logical for as a next step for us, because we don't require college degrees, so we hire candidates from all over the country. And when we do hire them from all over the country, it doesn't make sense for us to rip them out of their own hometowns and then move them to big cities which are already overcrowded. And even if we pay them a ton of money, the trade-offs in the end, commute and being away from their loved ones, and then the taxes that they have to pay, and costs of living in large towns and things like that, essentially just leave them with much less in the end. So we don't create happiness as a company. So we've always focused on sustaining local communities in small towns through people who truly care about that as a cause. And then the fifth example, or the last one I want to talk about, was about putting happiness above profits, which is an extension of what I said before.
Yeah.
And this is essentially the biggest one yet for us as a company. And I've been with this company for almost 11 years now, and I can personally vouch for this. And if there was a decision where the company had to choose between inconvenience or costs or compliance or things like that and employee happiness, they would essentially go through all of the other things and then ensure that employee happiness is the choice that they've made. Right? And it certainly pays off, because even during the Great Resignation for the vast majority of 2021, our own attrition as a company barely went up. And when I go into a room and I say I've been with this company for 11 years, I often encounter people who have been with the company for 18 years, or 22 years, or 24 years, things like that. So in that sense, putting happiness above profits has certainly paid off for us in the long term. So those are some examples. So given all that, transnational localism is essentially like a product of the rationality and the long-term thinking that we've always had as a company. And in my own personal view, maybe it is the most meaningful product, even more meaningful than the actual software product we've shipped.
Well, I think that's kind of so I'm fascinated by that. I have great admiration for that, because I think it's, as you rightly say, it's very much long-term sort of thinking. It's looking at everything as an input, right? And how do you serve your customers and the market and also the communities that you live in? It's not, this experience is a multiple domain thing. So it's always a bit like, it's about customers, and it's about employees, and it's about all of your stakeholders and your suppliers and all of these different sort of things. But also it's beyond that. It's also about your impacts on the world, or the experience that the world or your communities have with kind of you and all these different sort of things. And so I tip my hat to the long-term kind of thinking of it. I particularly like, I mean, I love the idea that the nuances and the depth of it all. I particularly like the idea that everybody's going zagging and you're zigging. So like everybody's going like, oh, we'll hit the big cities. And you're like, no, we'll hit the ones that are below that because that's where nobody else is going to go. And you go, brilliant. And you just kind of like fly under the radar sort of thing. But also the idea that, that you never ask for a college degree. And it's more about what somebody can do, or just about it removes the barrier to application, as it were. And so you open out yourself up to a bigger kind of pool, and it's about who people are and what they can do, rather than kind of where they've been and what they've managed to acquire. But then lastly, the thing around almost like decentralizing the development of the company through investing in local communities. And I think that, for me, I think that's particularly interesting, particularly when we think about what we've gone through the last couple of years with the pandemic, and we were forced to move to work remotely. And then most companies, because they've worked in generally a quite centralized way, were forced to do it, and that would put quite a strain on a bunch of people. But then you're almost like, you're naturally adopting a decentralized kind of model, or a networked kind of model with kind of a bunch of nodes, as it were. But it's not just about that. It's not just about building redundancy into the system. It's about building deep roots for the system in the local communities, which is to the benefit of those kind of people, where it's also a bit like, yeah, we don't want the talent talent doesn't necessarily have to come to us. We're going to go to them, because that's the nature of what we can. That's how we can operate. And I love that. I think that's really super, super cool. But it's like it brings to life some of the stuff, the art of the possible in many of this, and how you can and what we can do. And so I think that's super cool.
And for us, when we look at it in terms of even regional expansion into other global markets, when I meet with our employees in other offices, there's a stark difference that I see, because I also run into sales and customer facing employees of other large vendors and events and communities and things like that, right? So the motivations of these people are also drastically different because of how we hired them. And they're focused on, for example, instead of saying, I'd like to buy a house in the Bay Area and I'm going to work towards that to win the sales commissions, these are people who are saying, I know the businesses in this district or in this county, and I'm really excited about enabling them with technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be here and see their growth.
Yeah. I mean, it's a different outlook. It's not about what I can get, but it's like it all cascades down. It's a bit like you talk about, like I said, I'm very interested in the words that people kind of use. You talk about, you've been privileged to be able to serve at the intersection of X, Y, and Z. And so it's not about the acquisition of stuff or something or that personal advancement. It's a bit like, I want to serve these people through doing this. And so it's a very different, and you'll attract very different sort of people, I guess, because of that. And I think that's really interesting. But you also talked about this whole thing around, because we're going through this kind of period of kind of uncertainty. I mean, we came out of the pandemic, and we went through the pandemic and we went, whoa, the world's ending, and we like I was hanging on, and then we came out of that, and everybody went, big kind of like sigh of relief, kind of like crumbs. We got through that. That's kind of fine. It's not all completely over, but it's largely kind of we're through the worst of it. And then the world just kind of went weird again. And it's like, what? Like interest rates, inflation, supply chain shocks, kind of like shortages, kind of all these different sort of conflicts, et cetera, et cetera. Dark days are ahead. It's like we've entered the upside down out of Stranger Things, right? But but you're also going to go back to, I want to go back to kind of, you said this idea about, talk about doing the right things for your customers, making sure that you're focused on them. And then you also that you put employee happiness over kind of everything. And I wanted to kind of ask about that because it's actually what's interesting is what people can say about some of this sort of stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, customer success and employee happiness. Yeah, these are really important to us. And then you kind of like, you take that and you smash it into like a stressful environment and a very changing environment. And I was a bit like, are you still holding on to that? Do you still believe in all that sort of like stuff? What do you think?
I mean, so there's certainly direct correlation between the quality of customer experience and the quality of life that employees have, and employee success and employee happiness and things like that. So in that sense, we're indeed big believers in the fact that employees are much happier when their work has a direct impact on customer success. But having said that, it's actually ironic that I have to answer this question since you've just written a detailed white paper on this very topic. So I'd like to actually hear from the author himself. In fact, I'm actually interested to start off with what I think is the big picture so that I can understand and we can explain this to all of the listeners. So what's essentially the big picture? What's the thesis that this white paper is built around?
Wow. So it's a big reveal. Ta-da! So it's like, so Prashant is just going to just turn the tables on me for the first time ever on the podcast. Because actually, this is really interesting because we've been talking about this for a while. This link, this idea of right customer success and kind of employee happiness and the link and all of that sort of stuff. And then the lovely folks at Zoho said, well, yeah, this is what we believe. However, we'd like you to help us kind of look into that and then write a white paper about it. And so I was like, I'd love to. Thank you very much. So I did. And it's kind of coming out. It's going to be available soon. We'll kind of put a link in all of this sort of stuff. It's called, let me get the title right. The title as it stands is The Killer Combination: Customer Success, Happiness, and the Right Technology. That's what we're sort of like, we're talking about. We're also talking about how focusing on employee happiness and customer success can drive business results, because that's the real source, really. And what I did is I kind of said, okay, fine, let's look at some of the things that are kind of going on. And actually, we've got to understand where we're at, right? And we understand we live in a challenging environment. We talked about all of those different economic challenges, whether it's inflation or interest rates or supply chain shocks or shortages or just general kind of conflict and uncertainty. And one of the things that, on top of that, I think, there's a whole bunch of challenges in that sort of whole experience space. The first one, the primary one, I think, in this things, and it's heightened by the economic conditions, is that experience initiatives have to prove their ROI. That's kind of number one. We know that we hear all the time people cutting headcount or cutting budgets or investment budgets and all these different things. And therefore, if you want to do something that matters, you have to make sure that you can prove the ROI. So that's fine. That's from an internal sort of thing, a sustainability sort of thing. But from more of one of the other challenges that came out the last couple of years is that we also want, and you alluded to it, Prashant, is that we need to be more empathetic with our interactions with our customers. Our customers demand it. They don't want just to be brushed off. They want that sort of like level of understanding and an empathy to be able to build that engagement. But we've also got to be able to do that when potentially working in a hybrid kind of manner, a distributed sort of manner, given that we went from largely centralized to mostly remote where possible. And now we're figuring out how to do that sort of like in office, not in office, sort of like blend. And that becomes an interesting kind of thing. And then the other kind of things we've got to make sure that we deliver a personalized experience, because people don't want to just be treated as a number. And that's going to help us hopefully drive retention and loyalty. But at the same time as all of that sort of stuff, we've also got to pay attention to the people that are serving our customers. And what's fascinating is that there's still so many people that are on the front line serving customers, and they have to use like a number of like apps. I mean, like horrifyingly, I think the average contact center or help desk or support desk an employee is using somewhere between 8 and 12 different apps to solve customer inquiries. And I'm like, and then there I've heard horror stories of somebody or somebody somewhere having to use up to 40 different apps to solve like 40, like 40. Hello. Kind of like, can you imagine having 40 different tabs open on a browser? I mean, the very thought of that just gives me the idea. I don't get migraines, but it makes me think I'm going to get a migraine, sort of like start seeing size and feeling a bit funny. That's crazy. Crazy. How do we expect people to be productive and efficient if you're trying to figure out which tab to go to kind of access whatever kind of like the thing? It's like you'd have to have a screen that's like 12 feet wide to be able to kind of see that in a proper resolution. And I'm sorry, we're not in Minority Report. This sort of stuff doesn't kind of like work like that these days. We're kind of usually working on maybe one, maybe two screens if you're lucky. I mean, anyway, I'm gonna start ranting about that, but that just ridiculous. I mean, 8 to 12 is bad enough, but like 40, blimey. Anyway, these are all the challenging things we've got to think about, particularly that sort of thing around we've got to help people, help our agents, help our reps, help our frontline employees kind of do a good job. We have to think, not just when we think about employee experience, it's not just about scheduling and performance reviews and all these kind of like back office stuff. It's about how do we help them be excellent in the moment when they're asked of them. And I think that's a really kind of important area for us to focus. So all this kind of stuff and is becoming increasingly important, particularly when we have to work in that sort of hybrid sort of like in-office remote sort of things, because we want to make sure that they have the same equipment and support and tools available to them wherever they are, because it's all about being in the moment. So anyway, that's all this sort of stuff, and that's the kind of what we start to do in the issue of the white paper is it's not doom and gloom, but it's a bit like, this is hard. It's like shifting sands and all sorts of is a dynamic environment, and it's like, blimey, this is kind of really kind of hard. And it's like going, you wouldn't necessarily want to be the driver of that bus. You know, it's going to feel like an Indiana Jones kind of movie or something.
Oh, for sure.
You know, and it's so the thing that we kind of like, I looked into it, and so you dive into it and you think, Grams, you could have drowning a little bit, but I actually think, and because we tested this hypothesis, this idea that if you focus on success and you focus on employee happiness, is it that, you know, are those things are they good sort of foundational stones to stand on to help you navigate and succeed in an environment like this? And my research in the white paper, I looked at it, and it's both kind of industry research, but also academic research and all these different sort of things, and try and pull all this sort of stuff together. And I think the short answer to it is actually, yes, you should do, but you need to do those things, but accompany it with two other things. So the first thing you do, and it's more important than any of all those things, the success of your customers or the happiness of your employees, the first thing that you have to do and you have to get right is you have to have a clear experience, vision, and strategy. And I don't mean a strap line that goes, oh, we want to do this, that, and the other kind of thing, you know, the sort of thing that you can put on a poster on a wall. I'm like, no, it has to be almost like, it has to be full of stories about where things are at right now, and then a story about where you want it to be, almost saying the words of your customer, because that kind of helps you. You can actually start to paint a picture of what things are going to be, and then you can start really plotting a route map to there. And that becomes your strategy. But at the same time, you got to weld that to your business and corporate objectives. So you're really clear about one, relevance, and how you're going to deliver kind of ROI and success at the kind of the top line and the bottom line. And so when you do that, and that's the thing I think, and I've found in my experience and also my research, is that many people, they sort of do that, but they don't go far enough because it's hard work. But it's like doing your homework up front, do your preparation up front. You're almost setting yourself up for the long term, right? So it's like, actually, that's the thing. It's like having this clear customer experience vision strategy. That's number one sort of thing. Then the two things that sit underneath that is that they have to focus on the success of their customers, because that's going to fuel your growth engine, your retention, and your loyalty. And having this, and it's not just about a loyalty program. It's like having this success mindset. Is like, how do you put the customer at the center of what you do? How do you make them successful? Which might, like you said before, turn around and go like, you know what, this thing's not for you. You know, which means I don't get the extra sale, but you get the right outcome. And it's almost that's the mindset thing. You play, like you said, you play the long game because it's a relationship game. So you focus on the success of your customers, whatever that means. And then you focus on the happiness of your employees, because that sort of supports those two things. So it's almost a bit like when you think about your happiness of your employees, you almost have to think about the success of your employees as well in many ways. Because like all the research shows is that higher employee happiness and well-being at work is positively correlated to greater business profitability. And when you think about that, that means, it has to mean better customer outcomes as well. So those two things kind of fuse together kind of really, really well. So that's the first thing, and the two kind of things that sit underneath. Then the fourth thing that we've kind of found is that actually that's all great, and these are the foundations, but you have to have the right infrastructure to enable all of that. And that's what we mean is that in the conclusion of the white paper is that have the right vision, have the right strategy kind of in place, focus on the success of your customers, focus on the kind of combine that with a focus on the happiness of your employees, but it has to be enabled by the right infrastructure. And that is, the right infrastructure is technology, the right technology, something that is, you know, that is in line with your strategy, that is connected, it's integrated, all of those different sort of things. It's not a Frankenstack sort of thing. It's like your choice is driven by your strategy and your objectives. So you pick the technology to enable that rather than picking the technology and then going, oh, what can we do? Right. So it's getting it in the right order. So that's sort of kind of when we're, what we've kind of, basically, that's a long answer to quite a short question. Crumbs. So we believe that
I appreciate the detailing.
The thing about the kind of the white paper is just making the case, like these things, many people will be going, oh, it's tough, and therefore we have to cut sort of thing. We have to do this, but actually, in many cases, what we're saying in this is that to double down on this, double down on their kind of success and employee happiness, and this three-pronged approach supported by kind of technology is going to equip brands or firms or organizations to compete and navigate not just the immediate kind of challenges. These are short-term challenges, I believe, but actually set them up for a long-term success. And so, yeah, it's very much aligned with some of the things I think, but it's a real pleasure to go and dig into it and then kind of pull all the threads together and kind of put this together as a white paper. So, I'm going to stop now and ask if you've got any kind of like any other kind of questions, because I'm going to stop wittering on about the white paper. And otherwise I'll just give it all away.
No, I really love how excited you are when you talk about this. It really shows, and I've been, I've had the good fortune of having access to this white paper already. So I've read through it and I absolutely agree with the thesis that you put forward. But for the sake of our listeners, where can they go and get this white paper?
Right. So it is going to be on the Zoho site. We are going to, I don't know the exact URL kind of right now, but we are going to be, I'm pretty sure if you went Zoho, Zoho, white paper, Adrian Swinscoe, kind of like, or just search Adrian Swinscoe, white paper, customer success, employee happiness, a combination of those kind of words, you're pretty sure to find it. Or you just come here and look at the show notes, and we'll put kind of a link in it, and that's going to be your quick thing straight through. Kind of when the podcast goes live, we'll put a link in it. But it's going to be featured on the Zoho on the Zoho website, but with the link from my site and the podcast kind of pages straight through, kind of to that. So that's where it's going to be available. So do check it out. it's all available for free and stuff, and let us know what you think. But you turn the tables on me. I'm going to turn them. It's like one of those kind of like, they get those circular tables that you get in restaurants. Sometimes we have all the food in the middle and you spin it around.
Yeah.
I think they're called Lazy Susans. I don't know why. But I'm going to do that. I'm going to spin the table back around. And I want to ask, because like, given that you work with a whole bunch of brands across the place, I wanted to ask you, like, do you have any examples of firms that you're working with that sort of embrace this type of approach? Like that sort of focusing on the customer success and the employee happiness, and kind of to bring, rather than it just being like this thesis, as it were, you go like, actually, you know what? Here's a company that does exactly that, and here's what they do, and here's how they do it, and here's how they're benefiting.
Sure. So most of the companies that we work with are able to get one or two of these legs already by the basic virtue of being successful in their business. By the fact that they're successful, they're able to get one or two of these rights. But the trick is in going from successful to legendary is to get all three right. And rather than probably give you examples of specific companies, I thought I'll give you some very common sort of observations that we have across our customer base. And most of our customers are at various levels of maturity with respect to these three things.
Okay.
But I can certainly observe, at least from my own standpoint, that they're all committed to the approach. Everybody realizes this, and the pandemic has only doubled down on the fact that these three legs are really important. And we're observing some of these trends. I'll give you a few. The first is about clarity on the trickle down. Right? Everybody has a vision. Everybody has a mission statement and things like that. And in all of the companies where we felt that they had nailed their customer experience, the clarity that they had was astonishing, even for us. And most of it, stemmed from the fact that they wrote a business version of their vision statement. And what I mean by that is, there's a common sort of simple English version of the vision statement, which is meant for broad communication and inspiration and things like that. But the business version is actually a lot more verbose and a lot more specific. For example, what outcomes do we drive for our customers? Why do they come to us for those outcomes and not go to the competitors? What are the things that we will never compromise on with respect to what we do and with respect to what we deliver to customers? And something like this.
Can I interrupt? Because it's great to hear. Because I was talking to a friend of mine, well, he's now a friend, but a guy called Ari Weinsvik, who is the co-managing director, or like the co-lead with Paul Saginaw, or co-founder of Zingerman's out in Ann Arbor in Michigan in the US. And he does a lot of writing, and I think Ari's brilliant. And I had him on the podcast recently talking about this idea of visioning. And they wrote a kind of pamphlet on this whole sort of thing, and that's what we feature on the podcast, because that was kind of like what you're talking about, this idea, you get the top line, and then there's this business version, which is kind of so much more verbose and stuff. They're totally into that, the idea about telling stories sort of thing. And they have a vision, and they keep doing their different visions. And their visions are sometimes like, 10, 12 kind of and plus pages long, because it covers everything, every aspect of the business. They do that. They write visions for everything. Astonishingly, but not surprisingly, they wrote a vision for writing a pamphlet. So they kind of like start a story about how the pamphlet was going to turn out before they started writing the pamphlet. And I was like going, that's insane, but brilliant. And so exactly to your point, it's like going, the people that go, we stop at the top line, those are the ones that kind of miss the trick about going deeper and actually really understanding and almost like building the roots that reach into the different parts of the business. So I love that, the idea that sort of that there's people out there are doing that, just kind of, we do that same as everybody else, but you don't see this stuff, which is the deep roots. But this is the stuff that matters.
Absolutely. In fact, I think it's also a good idea to make the vision modular, in that it can be written out for each function or even each team.
Mm-hmm.
And at that level, it helps, people right off the bat connect, every team's goals with the overall company's vision for the customers. And then what happens is that the strategy that you use to bring this to life is only a manifestation of the clarity that you already have. Clarity in thought, clarity in expression, clarity of understanding, and all of that.
That's awesome.
And then the second thing that we're sort of observing amongst customers is a sharp focus on the end customer. Again, this is something that you will hear often from CX practitioners all over the world. And the way that we observe this is that these successful companies are essentially filled with employees who are all focused on customer success. And in some cases, that is also because they consume the company's offerings. But in the vast majority of cases, that focus itself, it stems from the clarity that I spoke about before. Clarity of thought and understanding, right? And in every project that employees undertake, they're able to quickly, evaluate how this particular project impacts the company's vision and the customer's ability to succeed in their goals and things like that. And consequently, prioritization becomes much easier at any scale in the organization. Right? And teams also, over time, it becomes muscle memory, and teams sort of orient themselves organically to react to any of the market changes that they may see. And pandemic is one example of that. And at the very least, the presence of competition doesn't phase employees in any way as well, because they have that clarity. They know what they stand for. They have that clarity, and they know what they're supposed to do to be there for the customer. So competition doesn't really phase them at all, right? And above all of this, they're able to, go home happy every day that they've made a difference. And that feeling is essentially priceless. We've seen that from our own experience. We're 12,000 employees now. We've seen that from our own experience, but certainly from the broader customer community as well. And the third thing that I wanted to talk about was about supporting employees at a day-to-day level, right? And when I say that, I realize that can seem like very different things to very different companies. In reality, however, it's not really that different. People want to do meaningful work for a reasonable amount of time every day, and then make enough money to be happy with their loved ones. That's practically it, right? And that might mean a different set of benefits in one industry. It might mean better technology enablement in another industry. It might mean more training or more onboarding in another industry, or maybe just better workplace safety in a different industry. But the means are not the same. They don't have to be, but the end often is the same. Everybody's working to support employees, and everybody, or at least the vast majority of customers that we work with, have realized that it more than pays for itself to support employees on a day-to-day basis. Right? So this triad of strategy, success, and happiness, we've seen that it's extremely powerful, and I may even dare to say it stands the test of time, right? In practically any industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's not new. It's not a surprise. I mean, right? It's like oh, look, here's been written on an old book that's from 200-300 years ago. Kind of like, here's a new one. Kind of different, kind of like slightly different words, but the same kind of like version. I mean, it's like this is age old, kind of like wisdom and common sense and logic and kind of all that, and good business generally. And I guess what we're doing is we're saying, actually, even in these modern times, we're like, and we're making it kind of like, this is a very current sort of focus. Is like reiterating it, refocusing on it. It's like going, it's not easy, and it will require you to do different sort of things. It's not just about service and the experience, it's also about the idea of success, which is slightly different. And sort of going on to that sort of next level, it's about the idea of like, well, and happiness isn't just, it's not about, happiness is not just about, giving people extra long breaks or putting a foosball table in, or kind of like, painting, having colorful walls or anything like, like that. It's like happiness is relative to different people. It's understanding that nuance sort of thing. And then the vision and the strategy side of things is like, it's hard work to get this right, and you have to review it again and again and again. You should have a broad sort of direction, as it were, but it will change over time, and you've got to keep adjusting. It's a bit like, if you're like sailing a ship, you get buffeted with the seas and the tides and the currents and the winds and all these different sort of things, and you've got to keep adjusting. Roughly where you're going to go, but you got to keep adjusting to make sure that you navigate all the things ahead. And so you're constantly steering. You can't just set it and leave it. And I think that's the thing. So we're just, all we're doing is we're reiterating, very age-old sort of like stuff, but it's like in a sort of a nuanced and updated sort of way. And so I think it's great. But I like the way that the clients are sort of like people that you're speaking to, the clients that you work with are sort of like digging into this and really understand it. But Prashant, I want to kind of like zoom out a little bit. But before I do that, I want to zoom out because and ask you some sort of broad sort of questions about just kind of how things are kind of in the industry generally, and just across the business. But is there anything else that you'd like to highlight that you want to kind of say before I kind of like anything I missed out that you'd like to highlight?
Nothing in terms of just what we've discussed so far, but I just wanted to take a moment to celebrate every single person out there who pulls up their socks and shows up to do great things for their customer. Right? The economic situation is uncertain, and then there may be another pandemic or outbreak, or maybe there won't be. And then it's monsoon season in many parts of the world, and then flu season and things like that. And given all of that, it takes strong will to go out and serve customers with business as usual. Right? And for that and more, here's an applause to everybody out there trying to deliver great customer experience. And you all make a difference, and you of all people need to believe in that.
Awesome. I love that. And I echo that. That's kind of like, thank you, Prashant, for that. That's well said, sir. Well said. So as I say, I wanted to switch kind of gears a little bit now. So we've gone through this, what I call the pandemic years. That sounds kind of quite dramatic. And we're into another period of sort of uncertainty, and I've been asking people just to reflect on, and it felt like that we've emerged out of the kind of the worst of the pandemic, and we're getting back to sort of almost a more of a steady state, and then the world changed again. We'd almost felt like we didn't have time to breathe or to stop or reflect or kind of whatever, and then it's all started to get weird again. But so I've been asking people just to stop and reflect and like, well, what are some of the biggest lessons that you learned over those kind of the last couple of years that you think will inform how you do things kind of going forward?
I think the last couple of years have turned things around for a lot of people, not necessarily in good ways all the time. And old habits in a certain sense have died hard for many people, right? But in interest of time, I thought I'll take this in like rapid fire style. Okay? So the first thing is, have a plan, but don't let it weigh you down. Right? And then the second is to keep and maintain customer experience as your North Star. I could not emphasize this any more than I already did.
Yeah.
The third is to go back to the basics when all hell breaks loose. Because that's the part that is so underrated, like delivering on the basics.
Yeah, that's music to my ears.
Absolutely, everybody's obsessed with all the bells and whistles, but the basics are the basics. They always win, right? And the last one is like a religious belief at Zoho internally as well, which is that cool may be famous, but reliable is legendary.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I love that. That's awesome. Right. So my next question was more like, I asked people to boil things down with their best advice, but I think you've just done that when your kind of lessons. So I'm going to skip that bit, and I'm going to go like straight to the kind of the end bit. So it's a bit of the fun bit, really. I call it my longitudinal social research, and it's like because that makes it sound fancy in my head, but it is literally a series of questions I ask people on every episode about, or most episodes about, it's like a word association in the game. So if I said, first question is like, if I said punk and CX, or what one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to CX? What would it be?
So the two words that immediately came to my mind were unapologetically curious.
Unapologetically curious. Well, you know what? I know that, well, I think we've had both of those two things individually, but not in combination. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to put those back on the I'm going to put those on the list in a combinatorial sort of like fashion. So that's cool. Thank you for that. I think that's right. You made me think about, I was doing a slide deck there earlier on, and I've got a slide which talks about being unapologetic as an image that sort of signifies that. And I thought it was, that's what it made me smile. The second question is, to follow up the kind of Punk CX book, there was Punk XL, and it introduced this idea that of experience leadership, and how experience is this multi-dimensional sort of thing: customers, employees, stakeholders, communities, leaders, investors, suppliers, all these different things. And I've been asking people, what sort of brand do you think is taking a more sort of systemic, holistic, integrated sort of approach to experience, and who's raising the bar? Who's kind of like setting the standards? So what do you think?
At a personal level, I really love REI, the retailer in the US, the adventure sports retailer in the US. IKEA, of course, and then Whole Foods, which again, it's like a grocery chain in the US, right? And if you notice, all three of them are in retail, so I do have a certain bias for retail, which is, just that it's substantially more difficult and it's substantially more challenging in terms of complexity and in terms of scale to do great CX in retail. And I've had a chance to work with multiple retailers around the world, and I've seen that their challenges can be drastically different based on the country itself. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, I always respect a retailer who's nailed their CX way more than any other company. So in that sense, I love these three brands.
Awesome. I kind of tell you, so IKEA, I think, are a staple. Whole Foods it's just the almost like a newer brand, but REI has just been around for ages. And I love its top of your list, and because also it has an alternative, a different business model as well, like in terms of an ownership kind of model. And I've talked about this on the podcast before. I don't know if you know this, but I'm pretty sure you probably do. REI have been doing things that have been so far in front of people for like decades. Like when e-commerce was first the kind of thing, rather than building warehouses, they connected their e-commerce kind of platform, the online platform, to their store inventory. Yes. And so they're like, why do we need warehouses? We've got stock in stores, and we've got people that are happy to help. And we're going to take this and we're going to push it on and we'll have it dispatched from a store kind of that's close to you. So it minimizes on shipping time and everything else. We minimize it. And the fact that it took most other brands about a decade to catch up with that sort of like stuff, if not more, and they were doing it right from the get-go, is just testament to who they are and how they operate as well. So I love kind of REI is a kind of a brand and a company, just the way that it operates. So, but thank you for those suggestions. But finally, before we go, because we know that this is in a, as I say, it's a bit like, feels like something out of, what's the word? Other Things, as it were. Kind of the world is going a bit strange, all this sort of stuff going on. We thought, rather than doing we thought we'd finish on a positive note. So I've been asking most recently, I've been asking people to tell me, to share with me a good news story, or what's the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week, so we can finish on a smile.
Right. So this wasn't really a week ago, more like the last month, but I guess
that's fine.
Stood out for me personally. And it's the story of an elderly neighbor who I know who lives right next door, right? And she's staying alone, and she had a home sample collection, scheduled for some tests that she had to run, for blood work and things like that. And the lab technician who came to collect the sample noticed that she was struggling to connect with her son via FaceTime, and she couldn't, initiate the call, or she couldn't accept the call. So there was some difficulty there, right? And this technician then helped her set it up, and then, made the call to her son, and then connected the both of them, and then left the place, right? His job was to collect samples for tests for blood work, and his role has nothing to do with IT troubleshooting. But he went out of his way to do this for his customer because he knew how to do it, and he took responsibility of that situation. And he may not be a CX leader today according to his title within his own organization, but in my books, he's already a CX leader.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, the point that you make out of it is about moments, right? And about taking responsibility. But I love that story. So thank you for sharing that. That's great. So Prashant, that's all I have for today. I just want to say, well, first of all, a personal thank you from me for asking me to write the white paper, but also thank you to you for not just the work that you do, but the work that Zoho does kind of as a company, and also for sharing your time and your insight and your expertise and your vision and your perspective and all those different sort of things. Just thank you so much for spending some time with me today on the podcast. That's been awesome.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks for having me on the podcast as well. It's a pleasure speaking with you. As we met in person 2 or 3 years ago, way before the pandemic. So certainly pleasure speaking with you again. And it's certainly a privilege to be a part of this podcast, certainly representing all the good work that we do at Zoho in helping our customers move to their own success.
Wow, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.